Hey guys, my guest tonight, Ben Westhoff, has done extensive research into the drug fentanyl. Who makes it, who buys it, who sells it, and the number of deaths caused by it. And boy, does he have a story to tell. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks, Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust, turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Wow, 1 week closer to Halloween, right? My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour, and I've got a great guest. We're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to my heart with Ben Westhoff. We're going to be talking fentanyl. And start off, if you're watching from Facebook, please hit, and you like what you hear, please hit that like and follow button. Same thing with YouTube. There's a little ghost in the bottom right-hand corner with a Sherlock Holmes hat on. And that's our mascot, and we have more than 450 videos sitting over there, and they're all different topics because, as you can see with this show, I don't always like to do ghosty topics. I like to do shows that matter. I'm a journalist. It's what I do. So, if you're listening and you're liking stuff, please hit that follow button, subscribe button, and all that good stuff. Anyway, today's topic is near and dear to my heart. I'm a pain management patient, and getting my pain pills, which is an opioid, hydrocodone, is getting harder and harder to get because the DEA has cracked down on all that. And there's been some articles recently, even opinion pieces in Newsweek and places like that, where the DEA is starting to realize that they're kind of cracking down on the wrong people, okay? Because what's happening is that the people that aren't able to get their pain medication anymore are going out on the streets and buying it. And like anything else, you don't know what's in that stuff, okay? It might be a 50-30 mixture. You don't know. You don't know what's in it. And a lot of the time, the overdoses that are being reported are from overdoses of fentanyl. And that's because some of the stuff you're buying, like the hydrocodone on the street or even marijuana, is laced with fentanyl. And you don't realize it till it's too late and you've taken the meds. So, a lot of this has to be looked at because a lot of what's going on with the figures, with the CD, with the feds and all that, a lot of it is because the street vendors selling the stuff. And Ben Westhoff was able to really dig into this thing about the terror part of fentanyl because it is something that has to be brought out, and I applaud him for doing that. I really do. And the more awareness people get about this, the less they're going to want to take it, right? But anyway, I'm going to shut up and bring him on, and he can introduce himself and all that good stuff. But I think this is a very important show to do, and that's why I wanted to bring him on. All right, here we go. Hello, sir.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. I'm doing great. As you heard in the beginning, I've been watching the stats too, about prescription drugs, and then you've got fentanyl on the other side of this. And I didn't mean to be a Debbie Downer to start off with, but I mean, that's the truth. I mean, people can't get their, they've cracked down on all that. People can't get their drugs or their opioids for pain, so they're going on the streets.
Yeah, that's something that I think it was a massive overcorrection in the opioid epidemic is that, we keep hearing about Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family and how that's our big problem. And that may have been our big problem, 15 years ago, but opioid pain pills, legitimate pills, are not the problem at all anymore. In fact, people like yourself who depend on them for like legitimate medical reasons, like you said, if you don't have access to them, you're going to have to, people are going out and getting them on the streets. And that's how we got into this mess in the first place. And so the real problem right now is fentanyl.
Yes.
And not hospital fentanyl, but illicit fentanyl.
Right.
And, a lot of people might know that fentanyl is an important hospital drug too, for epidurals, for a lot of different reasons. But the illicit fentanyl, the street fentanyl we see, is the exact same chemical. The problem is just that no one knows how to administer it properly. Drug dealers are mixing it up in blenders or in coffee grinders, whereas in hospitals you have trained anesthesiologists who are administering it. And just a tiny, tiny bit too much is enough to kill someone.
Absolutely. Tell me about you, sir.
About me, well, I live in St. Louis. I'm an investigative journalist, and I used to write about music, actually, mostly, and published a couple of books about hip hop music. But when I was the LA Weekly music editor, I started writing about the rave scene and why so many people were dying. And it turns out, though these deaths were attributed to ecstasy, that it wasn't actual ecstasy that was killing people. All of the ecstasy was fake and was being replaced by these new drugs coming out of China. And so no one knew anything about these drugs. And so I kind of made that my mission. And the most deadly of all of them was fentanyl.
So, what did it take to put your book together?
My book Fentanyl Inc., you can see it right there in the corner. I interviewed just basically everyone I could,
There we go.
Yeah, users, dealers, doctors, activists, treatment specialists. Kind of the climax of the book was when I went undercover to a couple of Chinese fentanyl operations in China. And I pretended to be a drug dealer, and I got to see a fentanyl lab where they were making the illicit stuff, and went to this big fentanyl precursors company with like hundreds and hundreds of salespeople. And it was just like any other company, the way that the salespeople were selling this stuff. And it was very eye-opening.
Now, when you talk about like being at the factory or wherever this was in China, watching them make this stuff, how do they create the fentanyl? How's it made?
Yeah, so I went to two fentanyl operations. One was in Wuhan, and they were mainly just selling it there. Like I said, it was like hundreds of young salespeople who were chosen for their English, sitting at cubicles and at desktop computers, communicating with people on Skype. And that's how I found these places. I just Googled buy fentanyl in China, and all these websites popped up. And so I started chatting with the salespeople. I also chatted with a lab owner in Shanghai, and I said, "Can I come visit your lab?" And he said, "Sure." And he kind of felt me out for a couple hours. We had lunch together. He even asked me straight up if I was a journalist, and I had to tell this whole, I had to put on a poker face and practice my acting skills to tell him this whole story. But I finally convinced him to take me to the lab, and it looked just like a college chemistry lab, with the black tables and the glassware, and except that the smell was really overpowering. It was the middle of winter, but they had all the windows open. The smell was so strong, I had to like put my nose into my shirt when I walked in, and it was just astonishing at the amounts of these drugs they were making. So fentanyl was banned in China a long time ago, but when I went in 2018, fentanyl analogs were still legal. And so basically it's just like they take the chemical structure of fentanyl, and they slightly tweak the molecule just enough so you have something that still acts the same as fentanyl, still gets people high, but it's technically legal. And so this company was focused on these fentanyl analogs. They also made these synthetic cannabinoids, which are better known as like K2 and spice. They're sometimes called synthetic marijuana. And these were kind of, this lab purported to be on the up and up and sell, and these chemicals were legal in China, but they were really for the West. They were sending them to the Europe and the US for recreational use. And it was a pretty small lab. There were only about maybe 5 employees, but I was shocked to see that the volume of these chemicals. And so, only 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough for someone to potentially overdose. So it's, the tip of a pinhead's worth is all you really need. And they were producing these like 1 kilo size bags, and there were barrels of them all over the lab. There were, just huge quantities of these chemicals being sent out. And like I said, this was just a tiny little lab.
Right. That's just incredible to me. And once it gets sent out, what happens to it? Somebody obviously buys it, and then it makes it to wherever it's going to go. And then what happens to the powdered stuff, or to it?
Sorry, I had to hit the cough button there.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that fentanyl is distributed. I'm sure you've heard of the dark web,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often sold. Or just a second, sorry.
Sure, no problem.
All right, yeah, I went down the wrong tube. I just made myself a little hot cocoa, and I must have made it too thick. So sometimes it's sold over the dark web, and people can do these transactions. Really, kids are the best at it and can have this stuff sent right to their front door. But a lot of times it's just done over the clear web and sent in fake packaging. And companies, especially the Mexican cartels, are the biggest client of illicit Chinese fentanyl products nowadays, and the vast majority of the fentanyl on the streets today comes from Chinese precursor ingredients, like the main ingredients for fentanyl, and they're finished in Mexico and sent up over the border, and that's how it all gets here. Most of it gets here today.
When you say finished in Mexico, is that putting it into pill form, or what does that mean exactly?
Well, the way to think about it is like they do 90% of the work to make it into fentanyl in China. And so since now even the fentanyl analogs are banned, so all forms of finished fentanyl are banned in China. But these precursor ingredients, they're kind of like the most important ingredients to make fentanyl, are still legal in China. And those, when they're sent to the cartels only have to do a small amount of chemistry to make finished fentanyl. So they do most of the heavy lifting in China.
Okay, it's interesting because I do hear stories. I have connections on the streets too, so I do hear stories about like people like I said earlier buying hydrocodone on the street and it's laced with fentanyl.
Yeah, that's a really big problem too, and that's coming out of the Mexican cartels as well. And what I tell people is that any pills, any powders that you buy off the black market these days can and do have fentanyl in them. So it's not safe to just show up at a party and do a line of cocaine anymore, because that can have fentanyl, meth, heroin, and then pills have become like probably the biggest problem. These M30s, they're called. They're meant to look exactly like Malacrot
Mm-hmm.
brand oxycodone, and these have been the kind of the biggest blockbuster drug for the Mexican cartels. And they sell these M30s, the blues, and they look just like a regular oxycodone pill, but the DEA says 40% of them have enough fentanyl to potentially kill someone. And now the biggest thing are these rainbow pills that again look like oxycodone, and have fentanyl, but they're all the colors of the rainbow. They're kind of like Skittles. They look like Skittles, some people say, and those are probably fooling fewer people. Like, people don't think those are actual pharmaceutical pills.
Right.
People are starting to ask for those by name, and they're very deadly too.
Well, I see this. I'm seeing warnings in the media about that too because of Halloween.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think drug dealers are handing these things out at the door to kids. I wouldn't worry too much about that, but they're definitely, it's a type of branding, a type of marketing that they're trying to distinguish
Hmm.
this fentanyl product from what's out there.
So, what's the market like for fentanyl? I know because you were at the factory, like you say, it moves pretty fast. So, how much do you think, monetarily wise, does China make on this stuff?
Well, the the market used to be focused on adulterating other drugs. So
Hmm.
most, thousands and thousands of people have died from fentanyl without ever even realizing they took fentanyl,
Hmm.
because it's cut into these drugs, like we were saying, like
Right.
meth, cocaine, heroin, pills. But now there's starting to be a shift in the market, like I mentioned, and now I think most opioid users, most illicit opioid users, know that there's fentanyl in their drugs. And
Hmm.
the problem is that fentanyl is so powerful, so strong, that I've heard a heroin user say that once you try fentanyl, you never go back.
Hmm.
And the sad truth is that even though this drug is killing so many people, it's killing more people than any drug in American
Yes.
history. There are people who really are seeking it out, and a lot of addicted users are looking for it, and that's kind of the way the market has evolved now. If you go to places on the West Coast, especially, like I was recently in San Francisco and San
Hmm.
Diego, there's huge. I guess, what part of the state are you in?
I'm in Sacramento, NorCal.
Okay, well, I'm sure they have it in Sacramento too.
Oh, I
It's
know they
just
do.
like open air drug markets,
Hmm.
basically, where some of the biggest tourist districts in I used to live in San Francisco, and I was just shocked that right by the BART station, there's people just openly buying and selling, passed out, really predatory drug dealing going on there. And, and it's all fentanyl. People aren't shooting it anymore. They're all smoking it off of tinfoil.
Hmm.
And it's like I said, it represents an evolution in the market. So for the Chinese companies, I don't think they're actually making that much money off it.
Hmm.
They sell these chemicals at really rock bottom prices at a really high purity level. But it's the Mexican cartels who cut them up. It's cut like every step of the distribution process. They more adulterants. So by the time street fentanyl gets to the end user, it's got like less than 10% purity. But the cartels are making billions of dollars off of it.
Hmm. Hmm. I find this, the whole process interesting because there's so much of it that's coming, over the borders and stuff, and people are getting a hold of this stuff. And like you say, nobody really knows the true dosages to take on this stuff. So every time somebody, takes it, they're just risking their life to do it.
Yeah, it's there is a safe way to use fentanyl, believe it or not, but like we were saying before, it requires anesthesiologists who know how to properly measure this stuff. And I think that most users actually prefer, say, heroin. Um, Especially since with fentanyl, it wears off so quickly. You need to re-up every 2 or 3 hours, and so it's really an awful drug in that way. And people are have to steal or do prostitution to buy it, and they're caught in this cycle, and it just gets worse and worse.
Once they found out you were a journalist, did they clam up, or were they more open with you to look at all this stuff?
Well, I didn't reveal my identity until I got home, but this one company in Wuhan where I went, it's called Yuan Chung, and not too long ago, the Department of Justice just indicted the CEO of this company where I investigated. His name is Ye Xuanfa, and I met with him, and I met with him once when I was undercover, and then I called him when I got back to the U.S. with a translator, admitted that I was a journalist. You know, he had no shame at all about what he was doing, and he said, "Well, it's legal under Chinese law, so what's the issue?" But the U.S. indicted him and put a $5 million bounty on his head for any information leading to his arrest. And so he responded with this long declaration in the federal court, basically blaming me for the indictment and all this. And he said I misrepresented his company. He accused me of being a spy or a secret agent. He also accused me of potentially working for Coke or Pepsi, which is a strange thing to say, but it's because his company makes this preservative used in colas. And he contends that Coke and Pepsi stole this chemical used for preserving colas from him. And he said that was my true purpose, was to steal this, the formula for this chemical. So it's all very strange, but he remains at large in China, and China has no extradition treaty with the U.S., and so they're not going to turn him over. Really, the only way he could be arrested was if he flew to the U.S. or one of our ally countries and got off the plane. They could arrest him there, but now he knows that he's wanted. That's almost surely not going to happen.
How long does it take from, say, starting to produce this stuff in the lab to when it hits the streets here? You know?
I'm not really sure. I don't think it takes too long. When COVID hit, there were supply chain issues. Like Wuhan, obviously, was like the center of where COVID came from, and they really shut it down with the quarantine. And very soon after, you saw the effects in the U.S. and people were reporting massive fentanyl shortages on the streets. But it didn't last very long, though.
How much? I don't know if you know this, but how much fentanyl do you think comes into the U.S.?
Well, it's really hard to say. I've spoken with different federal agents, DEA, Customs Border Patrol types, and I've heard that we intercept, like anywhere from 10% of the fentanyl coming in to less than 1%. So we're starting to you start to hear about these bigger and bigger busts, like hundreds of pounds of fentanyl or like tens of thousands of pills. But really, it's just the tip of the iceberg, and there's really no way to know how much is actually getting through.
Do you kind of like along that note, so that people understand it? How are when people are buying this on the street, are they just getting it in pill form, or does it come in the powder so they can smoke it, or what are they getting?
Yeah, it's both. And I think if you go on the streets of San Francisco or, Skid Row in LA or parts of Seattle, I'm sure Sacramento too, they offer them both. It's insanely cheap right now. Meth too, like the prices have just fallen through the floor. And I've heard that more powder is being seized right now. But there are these big pill pressing operations too in California, and you can, these sort of industrial pill presses, mom and pop operations, or I've heard Chinese nationals, Chinese American citizens too, have these giant operations in places like Oakland, where they're pressing up tens of thousands of pills at a time, and it's really hard to tell the difference between those and the pharmaceutical ones.
I find it terrifying, like you say, because they don't know anything about dosages. So when you're getting these pills, you don't even know. Like for instance, Norco, like I take 10-3-25, so I know how much opioid is in my pill. Where with this, you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, it's really a crapshoot, and like one pill from the same batch might be totally benign, and the next one could be fatal. So there's no way to know. You're right.
How long were you undercover?
I was just in China for about 2 weeks. So.
Okay. That's fabulous, though, that you were even able to do that. and not get, taken out by somebody, like they did. I don't know if it's like you see this stuff in the movies, and then you think it's like this, but then it's totally different. Like when you go in.
Yeah, well, my wife was certainly worried about me. It's not the same as the Mexican cartels, though. These organizations aren't like cutting people's heads off, and they don't
Right.
really have guns in China. These companies more just really want to stay within the law and make money quietly. And when the laws change, like they did ban these fentanyl analogs a year later after I left. So this company, this lab that was making them, stopped making them. It's really not a traditional lawless drug trafficking organization that these companies in China. They're called gray market operators because the chemicals they sell are legal in China but banned in the West. And so once, it's just a constant game of cat and mouse, because whenever China bans one of these chemicals, these labs switch over to producing something else that is still legal. And so now they're doing these fentanyl precursors, like I said, and also like different types of benzos. So like knockoff Xanax, knockoff Valium, and also these different novel opioids, these kind of like that are not strictly fentanyls, so they're
Right.
still legal. So you start to hear about these new opioids called ISO and things like that. And so that's just the nature of the problem, is that whatever gets banned, they're just going to find something else to make. So it kind of led me to the conclusion that we're never going to stop these drugs from coming into the US. We couldn't stop heroin,
Right.
and fentanyl is 50 times smaller, 50 times less is needed. So all we can really do is try to address the problem here, try to convince people to not use these drugs in the first place,
Hmm.
and try to help people with addictions get the treatment they need. That's all we can do.
It's sad though, because like you just said, people, aren't going to stop, and what gets me is you hear more and more about the deaths from this stuff, and it still doesn't deter people because they want to get high or whatever they want to do with it.
Yeah, there's definitely addiction is caught up a lot in a lot of other things like poverty. Like when you hear a lot about the chemical hooks of these drugs. Nicotine is actually even more potent,
Yes.
more addictive than heroin. And but often when it comes to opioid addictions, it's some people, they have trauma in their past.
Hmm.
They're out of work. They're having bad problems with their family or with housing.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, if people can get treatment, they can get proper counseling,
Hmm.
and they can get things right in their lives, that is the best recipe to be able to get off.
Now you were talking about the cost. What is the cost for somebody on the street to buy this stuff?
I mean, it's insanely cheap. It's like $5 for
Okay.
one dose of fentanyl. Basically, the pills. I've heard of the pills being even cheaper than that.
I remember back in the old days when I was starting out as a reporter, and the big trend was crank, because it was cheap to produce. And I remember the dime bags, and then the 20 bags and all that. So that's why I was curious about the fentanyl.
Yeah, well, meth too is a really really big problem right now as well. And usually you have situations where there's uppers and there's downers, and
Mhm.
so usually the uppers will be really popular, like meth in the 2000s, all the like backwoods crank cooks, and those deaths were really really rising, and they started falling, and then you had opioid deaths, the downer, those deaths started rising. But now we're having downers and uppers deaths are rising at the same time. So cocaine deaths are way up,
Mhm.
meth deaths are way up, fentanyl deaths are way up, and the problem is that fentanyl is being cut into these drugs,
Right.
and so that's spurring it. There's a lot of poly drug use. So like we talked about benzos like Xanax, it's very popular to combine opioids with benzos or alcohol with opioids. And the problem with that is that benzos and alcohol are also downers. And so when you combine them with opioids, your heart, you're basically your breathing just can slow to a stop.
Hmm. Well, it brings to mind too is that it's cheaper, and I think a lot of the reason why they do that combining, it's like it was like I said with crank, it's cheaper to produce the fentanyl than it is anything else, and so it cuts down on costs for producing the other stuff when you can combine it.
Yeah, it really is cheap, and they have these super labs in Mexico making the meth. The precursors also come out of China, and there's all these labs in China competing with each other to kind of undersell the others, and so you kind of have a race to the bottom where it's cheaper now in real dollars to buy these drugs than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely. So, how many deaths? Were you able to get stats on that in like the last couple of years, or that the year you went? Is how many deaths were caused by fentanyl?
Well, it was an all-time record back in 2018 when I was doing a lot of my reporting. But that looks like nothing compared to now. I mean, in 2021, it was 107,000 Americans died from drug overdose deaths, and the majority were from fentanyl. And it just doesn't look like there's any sign of stopping. Is the big problem. I think these pills really are the big problem right now because people see a pill and they say, well, this is a pharmaceutical product. This comes from a doctor. This is medicine. How could this possibly have any ill effects? There are not a lot of people who use heroin in this country, but lots and lots of people use pills. And I think we've really only started to see the black market get filled up with these fentanyl cut pills. And there's also a lot of Adderall being cut with meth.
Yeah.
That's like the other big thing right now. And so you just can't. I take the examples of Prince and Tom Petty. These were two huge, wealthy rock stars who you would think could get like safe drugs. But even they died from adulterated pills that had fentanyl. They both were on opioids for pain,
Mhm.
and if they can't get safe pills, there's no way someone on the street is going to be able to.
Here's a question I have, and I don't know if you can answer this. I mean, every pill you get, whether it's an opioid or aspirin, I'm talking about from doctors and hospitals, everything has a lot number. Like hydrocodone will have an M or something on there, with a number behind there. Are they putting lot number? Excuse me, God, my mouth doesn't want to work. Are they putting lot numbers on these pills at all?
Yeah, they really look exactly the same.
Okay,
I mean, sometimes they're a little more crumbly. They're not as kind of tight,
right.
but for the most part, you can't trust your trained eye. If you get it from a pharmacy or from a doctor, you're gonna be fine. There's not fake pills,
Right.
but don't you can't just trust your eyes.
And how big is? I mean, as far as like they're always talking about closing the border with Mexico. You know, but I mean, I agree with you. I don't see how they can stop this stuff because it's going to come in other ways.
Yeah, I actually toured the border recently down in San Diego, and there's parts with the old wall, which is kind of pretty short, and then the Trump wall, which is huge. There's actually two walls, and there's kind of like a DMZ zone in the middle,
Hmm.
and that's like 20 feet high, and but like um, it stops at the ocean, for example, so you can just like swim out. People can just swim around that wall really easily. And then it also stops in the mountains, like the Otay Mesas. There's no way to really construct a wall there. And so people can just literally walk around it. So there's no, and plus, the majority of the seizures happen from drugs that are brought across the official border crossings, in cars. That's the most common way. There's other ways to do it, like with drones and with tunnels. There's a lot of ingenuity from the cartels, but the point is, like you're saying, that it's we're never going to stop this stuff from getting in here. So it's pointless to me to spend these billions of dollars trying to do it.
Oh, I agree with you there as well, because it's going to come anyway. And like you were saying, there are creative ways to hide it, and and physically hide it. We'll just put it that way. Where no one would look. Well, technically, no one would look. It's a horrible problem, but I mean, I don't see a way. I mean, you got the border at Mexico, you got the border up in Canada. I mean, it's coming in from everywhere.
Yeah, the situation in Canada is different too, but it's a big problem up there too. There's a lot of China shipping directly to Canada. There's a lot of Chinese gangs in Canada that are actually laundering fentanyl profits through real estate. And so in Vancouver, British Columbia has the biggest problem, and the real estate prices have gotten out of hand there. And from what I understand, that the fentanyl laundering money is a big reason for that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think too that there might be some payoffs going on with this stuff? As far as the U.S. is concerned, that somebody really, really high up knows what's going on, and they just get their little payoff and off they go.
Well, it's hard to say. I'm sure in China there's a lot of corruption going on about letting the fentanyl out of the country. I'm sure in Mexico there's obviously a lot of corruption going on. When it comes to the U.S., the DEA has gotten up to shenanigans in the past in terms of in the CIA, in terms of like turning blind eye to other countries, making drugs, or even helping produce them. Federal agencies even helping produce drugs abroad. So it's really, I mean, far be it from me to disavow any potential conspiracy theories, but I mean, it's very hard to imagine that there are U.S. politicians on the national level who are trying to encourage this.
And like you say, and I agree with, like I said, I agree with you that it's going to continue no matter what. It's always been there, that drug trade, and it's just so hard because there's so many people involved, and so many loose ends. As they say, it's such a slick operation to where it's hard for even the DEA to figure out who's doing what.
Right. And we've heard a lot now about the fentanyl trade moving to India, for example. So China has the world's biggest pharmaceutical industry, and India has the second biggest. And most of it is legitimate, but then a small part of it, they have all these trained chemists, super, great universities, chemists, people trained in chemistry, and some of them go to the black market. And India now there's a lot of Mexican cartel members who are being caught there doing trades, and fentanyl has been known to come out of Russia, and there's really there's the drugs are always going to find a way.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think the United States stance should be? I mean, should they just I'm not saying turn the other cheek, but should they just kind of let up on trying to do something about it? Because I mean, like you say, no matter what happens, it's going to come through anyway.
I don't think we should be spending billions of dollars to try to, fight the trade in the way that we are. For example, one of the biggest problems is the Mexican cartels, and there's like 30,000 murders a year in Mexico, and the cartels are really driving that. And so the idea of legalizing fentanyl is something that most people can't imagine, and like I would never want to see my kids like going down to the corner pharmacy and being able to buy some fentanyl. But trying to take this out of the cartel's hands, it would really save a lot of bloodshed. It would really save a lot of lives if we could somehow get the cartels out of this business. Like legalizing marijuana, for example, in the U.S., has had a lot of problems, like there's still more black market weed being
Hmm.
sold in places like California than there is legal weed. I think maybe because the taxes are so high and other issues, um, but it has kind of gotten the problem out of the cartels. The cartels used to actually supply the majority of the marijuana in this country. And so, it can be done to get the cartels out of the game. But, I think we need to strongly look at programs like heroin maintenance, which is basically like giving free heroin to addicted users to help them, sort of maintain their habits. And then that will get the drug dealers out of the game.
Right.
That will make it so these addicted users don't have to steal, like commit illicit activities to get money for their drugs. And that's another idea that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of appetite for in the US right now. But as the problem continues to get worse, I think we have to really consider dramatic outside the box ideas.
Well, I was thinking as you were saying that, though, that can cause a few problems too, because if you start regulating, giving it to people, but you're giving to them in certain doses, so they don't go through withdrawals and stuff. But the problem is you're going to get people that want more and more. So then again, it's going to go. You're going to have that illegal drug sale again.
You mean like diversion? You're
Right.
saying like,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I guess they do this in Switzerland, and I think they've had a lot of success. And the way they do it is that you have to use with inside the clinic. There's no take-home doses. Right now the methadone programs are kind of similar to this. But methadone is a bad drug in a lot of ways. It's some people think it's actually more. Some people find it even more addictive than heroin, and it makes people have all sorts of bad side effects. Whereas it really is possible to live one's life and be addicted to heroin. If you as long as you have a clean supply. Part of the
Hmm.
problem is just like dirty needles and acquiring the heroin is where a lot of the danger is. And so obviously it's better to not be using any opioid at all. And
Right.
there's a treatment drug that I recommend called naltrexone, the Vivitrol shot, which blocks the opioid receptors from being able to receive opioids at all. And some people find that to be really effective. The problem is you have to be completely detoxed. You have to have all opiates out of your system
Hmm.
for a number of days before you can take naltrexone, which is difficult for a lot of addicted users. But the point is we do have these different treatment options, and a lot of the addicted users out there don't have access to them.
This is all very interesting to me because I mean, like my case, I'm not addicted. I take it to, it's a thing of life for me to be able to function in my life. And when you talk about these programs like they have over in Sweden, that's kind of like what that is. It's so they can function, because coming down off that stuff is not good. It's not a good feeling at all. If they can keep people, just enough with it and everything so that they can function, then why not?
Yeah, people live like long, productive lives,
Yeah.
and then something really strange often happens. People who might have been lifelong addicted users
Mhm.
find themselves aging out of opioid addiction. Like they wake up one day, they might be in their 60s or whenever, and they just say, "Well, I don't want to do this anymore," and they stop, and it's
Mhm.
just that easy. So it's very strange. Like drug use, like any psychoactive chemical use is very much dependent not just on the drug itself but on the setting.
Mhm.
And they found that, like, when they give mice these injections of opioids, and then one day they have them in this cage, and every day they give it the same dose in this cage, and the mouse gets used to it. Then one day all of a sudden they switch it to this other cage and give the same dose, and the rat like overdoses and dies.
Mhm.
And it's the same thing with like the time of the day. The time of the day affects the reactions, and there's so much about drug use that we just still don't even understand.
Well, here's a question too. I mean, the way the U.S. has approached all this too is they've made the drug dealers liable for these overdoses, these deaths. And
Yeah,
you think that's the way to go with that? I mean, it's not. I mean, I hate to say it because I'm not trying to like favor the drug dealers or anything like that. But I mean, they can only do so much because they're just out selling. I mean, it's whoever's taking this stuff that is going to miscalculate.
right. I mean, yeah, I'm not in favor of certainly the death penalty, or incarcerating people for charging people with murder. I'm not in favor of that. I mean, first of all, people have free choice. It becomes more complicated if it's an addicted user. So are they really free to buy this product or not? That's a good question. But it's not the same as murder, and it shouldn't be treated that the same way. That's how I feel.
No, I agree. I mean, I agree with that 100% because it is free will. That person, if they're going to take more, if they want to take more, they're going to find it, no matter what.
A lot of times, the drug dealers themselves might not even know that fentanyl is in the drugs they're selling. A lot of drug dealers are only selling to support their own habit. A lot of times it might be two people using together, and one of them dies, the other one could get charged with murder, but it could have gone the other way. The person charged with murder could have been the one who died, and it's more complicated than it's made out to be.
Now, here's a question that I've always wondered about this: how does the drug dealer get the drugs? Who do they get them from?
Well, there are various distributors along the way. So, like I said, it starts in China, it goes to Mexico, and then there's these people running it across the border, cartel affiliates, and then there are these sort of major distribution points that are in places like LA, Phoenix, and then they're sort of Mexican American often distributors who take them to these different regional hotspots. So like Chicago, New York, there Oakland is another big one, and then there's kind of like more localized gangs who are distributing them. So like in St. Louis, it's African American gangs usually, and like West Virginia, it's like white families are often doing the drug distribution. There's like the MS-13 gang and I think LA and places like that, and then they're kind of farmed out to the street level dealers who can be from all walks of life. But it's like I said, the drugs are sort of often cut every step of the way when these people want to make more money, so they want to make their supply go further.
It's much cheaper to add something like fentanyl than there is anything else to make it go further, which is what they were doing with crank too. All those years, and they're still doing it. They're still doing that stuff. Do you think that like I said, with the U.S. going after so many of the drug dealers, it's not going to end the problem? I mean, they have to go after these cartels.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just a losing battle. The U.S. doesn't have jurisdiction in Mexico, and the cartels are smart enough to sort of limit the bloodshed in the U.S. And so, the Mexican president is kind of like softening his stance on going after the cartels because it causes so much death, and it's the Mexican cartels are really really a serious problem that no one knows what to do about, and the supply, reducing the supply, reducing the demand in the U.S. is, a lot of people think, the only solution.
Well, that's the thing, and I don't know if you can, reduce that demand. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, it certainly is not headed in that direction right now. So I unfortunately, people look for some optimism from me about the future of this, and there's not a lot to be found. I mean, the good news is that there's more information than ever. People are starting to learn about the truth about the drug supply, but the bad news is that I'm almost certain it's going to get worse before it gets better.
This has been going on, though. I mean, let's be realistic about this. This has been going on for as long as people could produce these drugs.
Yeah, I mean, throughout human history, people have
Way back.
been using drugs, and alcohol, and it's kind of been in some ways the glue of society. But when it comes to something like fentanyl and these strong opioids, this was never, the human brain was never wired to receive, and meth, this type of stimulation. It's these
Right.
reward pathways that are being just overwhelmed, and we're not equipped for it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because when you think about it too, like, back in the 1800s, there was morphine, and people were getting addicted to morphine even back then. So, I mean, like I said, this has been going on for years and years and years and years and years, and I don't see it ending.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the curse of the opium poppy, and this plant that has been able to give the most pleasure possible to a person, to a human, but also the most pain possible. And we've been wrestling with this plant for probably thousands of years.
Hmm. Well, what I found interesting when I was 12, or 10, 11, or 12, over in Hungary, the family made a trip back there, and I remember my mom commenting because they had all these baby buggies, and they parked the baby buggies outside the stores and go shopping and leave the babies out. But the babies are all quiet, and my mother couldn't get over that. The babies are just having a good old time; they're all quiet. And then she found out why. It's because they would take the poppy seed and they would make a drug out of it, a liquid drug out of it, and they would put the stuff on the tip of the on the
Pacifiers.
pacifiers. Yep.
Wow, I've never heard that before. That
Yep.
yeah, it sounds like something they used to do in the U.S. And when opium, morphine was like the only medical drug that really did anything, that for sale at like Sears Roebuck, and they gave it to colicky babies.
Yep. Absolutely. All those babies
Crazy.
die.
Well,
But
I have to get going. I have to go get my kids, but thanks for having me. I really have enjoyed talking to you.
well, I appreciate you coming on. I really do. And it's something, it's word that has to get out. You know what I mean? And people need to know about this stuff, and they just don't realize the extent of it and where it comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And information really is key. Like, don't think your kids aren't going to be involved with this stuff, because it's everywhere.
So, what do you say? Last question. You're standing on a street in Vegas with other people that have done research on this topic. How do you get people to read your book?
Well, people are most interested in my infiltration of these Chinese drug operations, and that's kind of what I'm best known for. I was on like Joe Rogan, and I've been I was a subject of a National Geographic documentary recently, and all sorts of stuff like that. But I like to think that with this story of international intrigue,
Right.
people come for that, but they also, when they read my book Fentanyl Inc., there's an overview of how this came to be, the history of fentanyl,
Mhm.
and sort of how it jumped from the medical realm into the recreational realm.
Well, I really admire you for having done it, and I hope good things continue to come to you. You know what I mean? And hopefully, like you say, who knows if they're going to be able to control this or not? Maybe, probably not, but maybe they'll come to some kind of conclusion with it.
Yeah, well, we discovered a cure for COVID, so or a vaccine anyway. So we have to put our best efforts into this too.
Absolutely. All right, Ben. Well, thank you. How can people find you?
You can just Google benwesthoff.com. That my website that you had up before, benwesthoff.com,
Okay.
is the best way. So,
All right. Well, thank you so much again. Maybe we'll get you on again on a later date for an update or something, But I really appreciate you coming on.
okay. Well, thanks for having me, Charlotte.
All right, Ben. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, I learned a lot about trafficking, that stuff. Sorry I was a little off. I didn't sleep well last night, so I've been kind of loopy today. Anyway, tomorrow, Michelle Zirkle is going to be with us, and she's going to be talking about living in a haunted house. She's written a book based on her life in this haunted house. It's more of a piece of fiction, but it's also based on truth of for life in this house. So she's going to be with us tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and I think we're going to enjoy that. Again, I've been through this and with my pain management over and over, and I know there's a lot of people like me who are just fighting to get the pain stuff that we need, and the DEA did make a mistake. They did make a mistake when they put the rules in, because hardly anybody has died from prescription opioids. The people that have died are from the stuff on the streets. So I'm glad that some of the states are starting to take action and fix what I call the major error, because it's sad, because there's people that desperately need the stuff and aren't getting it, and that's why they're having to go on the streets and get this other stuff, and it's killing them. It's killing people. Anyway, if you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 people too. We're equal opportunity here at California House Radio. And again, if you're watching from Facebook and you like the show, please feel free to like and follow. And if you're watching from YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, because like I said, we've got more than 450 videos sitting over there, and they're all different topics. And yeah, I think there's something for everybody, just like this show. But anyway, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with Michelle Zirkle. Have a good night.